After nearly 5 years of being the Switch's best-selling game, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has finally received DLC in the form of the Booster Course pack. While the whole thing obviously hasn't released yet, the first 8 tracks, or the first 2 cups, the Golden Dash Cup and Lucky Bell Cup, have dropped. The DLC is said to be entirely made up of retro tracks, and of course, that's true for these first 8 as well, as they all hail from previous games in the series. Those tracks are Paris Promenade from Mario Kart Tour, Toad Circuit from 7, Choco Mountain from 64, Coconut Mall from Wii, Tokyo Blur from Tour, Shroom Ridge from DS, Sky Garden from Super Circuit, and Ninja Hideaway from Tour. Welcome to episode 7 of Level by Level. In today's episode, we're going to be analyzing the 8 tracks I just mentioned based on how fun they are, but also how good they are as retro tracks. While nitro tracks pretty much just have the job of being fun and creative, retro tracks have a job of not only maintaining what made the original track work, but also changing and adapting it to make the reintroduction of the track feel justified. So with that said, how do these 8 tracks stack up to the rest of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's fairly great track record when it comes to retro tracks? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. If you enjoyed this video and want me to do this for the future 40 tracks, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. At 100k, I'll be ranking every moon in Mario Odyssey, but without any more delay, let's jump right into our first track of the Golden Dash Cup, Paris Promenade. Now I'm going to be totally honest with you all. I haven't really played that much Mario Kart Tour. I know, shocking, but that essentially means all 3 of the tour tracks here were completely new for me. And to my surprise, these actually ended up being some of my favorites to come out of the DLC. So a lot of the tour tracks have multiple versions of themselves in order to fill out the content for that game. Since these tracks were also designed to be played on the phone as well, many of them are quite simple, so how did they get around this problem when porting the track over? Well, it's simple. They just combined all of the different versions on top of each other. Now that might seem like a terrible idea on paper, but let me actually run through the course for you all. So when you start the race, you have the option of either going left, right, or through these piranha plant cutouts using a mushroom. All the paths combine to the same spot where you then reach a glider ramp and get to see the Eiffel Tower. Now something I didn't notice until playing in time trials, but there's actually a hidden shortcut if you take a sharp left turn in front of the tower. On the one hand, I really like this hidden shortcut, but on the other, it requires a mushroom, so you know some poor kid is going to try to go down this route and then just slowly have to drive through the sand because they didn't have a mushroom. Anyway, you then reach a piranha that you have to go past and then take a few more turns before reaching the end. Now normally that'd pretty much be where the layout stops, however after completing the second lap, a bright arrow sign points you to the right of the circle mentioned at the start. That's right, lap 3 takes you on a completely different route from the first 2. When I discovered this for the first time, I thought that was a really cool idea, but what I thought was even cooler is that a majority of the third lap is actually just doing the track backwards. It's always really neat to get a new perspective on tracks for racing on, but since you are going backwards, you can even run into people that are really far behind you. Or you can run into people that are really far ahead of you if you're bad. Anyways, after passing back down under the Eiffel Tower, you get to do the gliding section one more time backwards, and get led back into the 3-path choice from the start, just backwards this time. Overall, this track was shockingly really good. The gimmick of going backwards on this track is something no other track in Mario Kart 8 has done, making this stand out in a great way. Now driving on it is still relatively fairly simple with only 2 real shortcuts, but the gimmick of it changing on the 3rd lap really carries this one a ton. I do have to say that I feel like the bit where you go under the Eiffel Tower is a bit too open, like to the point where it almost feels completely empty, but other than that, pretty solid. Based on the other tour track we'll get into in a bit, it seems like the layout changing based on the lap will be their main gimmick, and I think that's a fantastic way to bring all the variations of the track over and make them distinct from their original versions. Anyways, we're off to a pretty good start. I guess I should comment on the music as well. All of the tracks got new remixes from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's music team, which is super exciting since I think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the second best Mario soundtrack just behind Odyssey. With that said, yeah, the song here is just okay. It certainly fits the setting, but it's not something I'm going to listen to much outside of the game. Alright, 1 track down, so let's jump right into our next one, Toad's. Let's go! Oh yeah, it's Toad Circuit, everyone. You know how I said the last one really surprised me? Well, let's just say that this was the least surprising track of the DLC. Toad Circuit is easily the worst track added in this set of 8s. I could have said spoiler warning, but no, everyone agrees. Okay, commenter, you actually think it's the second worst one. Good for you. Sadly, no one cares. Anyways, yeah, this one is just really boring. Not a bad course per se, but like, why did they bring this back of all courses? This is Mario Kart 7's first course, and just like every other Mario Kart game, they have to have at least one simple one to get everyone used to the game, which is great, but why did they add it to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe as its 50th track? I mean, looking at the layout, it's nothing all too special. Actually, wait, what am I saying? It's not special at all. I mean, sure, on lap 2 or lap 3 in 200cc, you get a glider ramp at one point. I mean, sure, on lap 2 or lap 3 in 200cc, you get a glider ramp at one point, which can be used to get like a coin. There's also a ramp in the sand, and you can cut through these pipes, but like Mario Kart Stadium also does both of those things a lot better. Honestly, it's kind of unfair to compare Toad Circuit to Mario Kart Stadium, because that course is at least interesting aesthetically and has anti-gravity, which Toad Circuit and all of the DLC tracks are lacking. So since I'm already being negative here, I think it's a good idea to get the two major negatives about all 8 of these tracks out of the way. For one, none of them feature anti-gravity, Mario Kart 8's staple feature. Now to be fair, not every retro track had anti-gravity in Mario Kart 8, but I do find it concerning that not a single one of these had it, as anti-gravity is one of the things that make Mario Kart 8's track design so interesting. But I can live with that for the most part. One thing I do genuinely dislike about all 8 of these tracks is how they look graphically. These are not even subtle downgrades from the main 48 tracks. It's super obvious that significantly less effort went into making these tracks look good compared to the others. Now some of them, like Choco Mountain and Ninja Hideaway, still look decent, but then you get Toad Circuit, which just genuinely looks ugly. I used to think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was one of, if not the best looking game on Switch, but with soon to be half of the tracks looking like they came straight from a phone, I don't think I can justify that anymore. I won't mention it again for the other tracks in this video unless it really affects the track to me like it does here, but just know that the graphics are fairly disappointing. Well anyway, we were talking about Toad Circuit, and is there anything positive I can say? I mean, the track isn't unfun to race on, just kinda boring. Okay, that's still kind of a diss. The music here is actually pretty solid. I definitely like it more than Paris Promenade's theme at least. I got nothing else. I think it's time we move on to Choco Mountain. Alongside Paris Promenade, this was another huge surprise to me. Unlike that one though, I'm actually fairly familiar with Choco Mountain. What surprised me here was just how much this track was actually changed. If I were to describe the original version of this track, I'd say it was very claustrophobic. At every single point of the track, you're surrounded by the mountain, and to be honest, I was never really a huge fan of that. It didn't help that the dark brown everywhere just made this track feel kinda lame, but I absolutely cannot say the same about the Mario Kart 8 version. Right from the intro, we get to see the inside of the tunnel section. Originally, it was just a completely empty tunnel, but now it's got swoopers at the entrance and a bunch of diamonds in the walls, along with some off-road you can cut with a mushroom. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Even at the track's start, we're treated to an entirely different feel. Instead of being surrounded by mountains like I said before, the cliff is now completely open in front of us, which I think is significantly more interesting. The fog and paratroopers flying around not only add to the aesthetic, but also make it feel like we're actually high up on a mountain. The original track never really gave me that impression. It felt like we were in a valley between hills, but now we can actually see how high up we really are. We already talked about the tunnel a bit, but afterwards we got another fantastic addition to this track, a glider ramp. I think this fits here much better than an anti-gravity section would, and since I still think this track looks fairly good, Choco Mountain was lucky enough to not really get too affected by the two elements holding back all these retro tracks. The glider also helps us feel like we're really high in the air, which is absolutely the feeling this track should be trying to sell. From there, the track remains mostly unchanged from the original. There's of course the iconic boulder section, and I swear they perfectly timed these boulders to come out right when I passed it in 200cc time trials. There's also a little bit of added off-road here at the end, and finally, after all these years, we can actually trick off these hills at the end. Going back to older Mario Kart games without tricking always felt super wrong, and it makes every single ramp super unsatisfying to go off of, so I'm happy that these hills finally feel complete. So as you can probably tell by how I haven't said a single negative about this track yet, I like this one a lot. Not only is it fun to race on with the boulders flying down and the open cliff sides to fall off of, but this is also a fantastic retro track as it revamps and changes pretty much every single issue I had with the original version. While it may not be as unique gimmick-wise as, say, Paris Promenade, I do think this edges that out in terms of being a good retro track. I'm honestly struggling to find any negatives with this one. Oh, you can't ram your head into the wall to skip a lap anymore. Come on, Nintendo, get your act together. Of course, we do have to talk about the music, and it's fine. Again, not something I listen to much outside of the track, but it does fit the track itself pretty well. Now, one thing I do want to add before we move on, this and a majority of the other tracks were taken directly from Tour. Personally, I'm okay with that as long as the Tour remake is already fantastic, which in this case it is, so just keep that in mind. But that brings us to our final track of the Golden Dash Cup. It's time for the fan favorite, Coconut Mall.
You just got coconut mauled. Share this with all your friends.
Alright, now this might be a big hot take, but I think Coconut Mall actually got one of the weaker remakes. Right at the start, we have a personal nitpick of mine. One thing I really liked about the original on Wii is the fact that the escalators were kind of hard to distinguish which direction they were going. It made them much more interesting in my opinion, and of course, more fitting in a mall. Now they have bright green and red arrows, and while yeah, they're still technically the same functionality-wise, I think a lot is lost when you make the two sides look so much different. But anyways, continuing on, the track is pretty solid as it always was. You have the split path of either going to the bottom for a boost panel, staying on top, or cutting through this area with a mushroom. After our second set of escalators, we get a graphical change from the original that I actually really like. These hallways in the original always felt kind of weird and out of place, but now they're decorated with Mario references, which I think look a lot nicer. A little bit after, there's another split path that lets you either glide or just regularly jump off. I always go for the regular jump, no idea which is faster, but I like that one a bit more. Then we get to the final change, and again, not really one I'm a fan of. In the original, there were several boost panels that were surrounded by Miis driving their cars, which made this a very high risk and reward section, as you could try to hit the boost panels, but risk getting hit by a Mii. In Mario Kart 8 though, not only have the Miis been executed, but the Shy Guys now in charge of the cars literally don't move at all. They don't even hurt the player if they run into them, they're basically just glorified walls. So in the end, this one is very conflicting for me. Is it fun? Yes, of course it is, it's Coconut Mall. The layout is still fun to run through, but as a retro track, honestly, I think this one is kind of a hard miss for me. Absolutely none of the changes in this version improved on the original, aside from a few aesthetics, and even then, not every aesthetic element is changed for the better. The glider ramp is cool, but that was in Mario Kart 7's version, so it's nothing new. This is still far from a bad track, I have a lot of fun racing on it still, but I do think this might be overall inferior to the original Wii version, or at least the Mario Kart 7 version. Let's not give those weird Mario Kart Wii stands a W. If there's one thing I think we can all agree on though, the music is still a banger, and it always will be. I'm happy we got a new rendition of this because it's so much fun to listen to. But that concludes our first cup, but we did get a second in the form of the Lucky Bell Cup, so let's jump right into that. Much like the last cup, this one starts off with another tour track, this time being Tokyo Blur. This is a very similar gimmick to Paris Promenade, though it does some things better and some things a bit worse. So starting off with one of the things it does worse, I find the general layout to be significantly more boring than Paris Promenade's. The lanes at least feel much wider, and there aren't really many shortcuts here. The only one I've been able to find is this standard ramp in the off-road, and even then I don't really like taking it much due to the angle it sends you at. Compare that to Paris Promenade, where there's a whole alternate route and even a fun cut through some Piranha Plant cutouts. I also just don't really find much of this track to be too memorable. Maybe it's because I haven't played on it all too much yet, but there's no standout moments here for me. One thing I think Tokyo Blur does better is the fact that it changes its layout every lap instead of just the final one. You start off the race going to the left, then on lap 2 you have to go to the right, then left, and finally on lap 3 you go right and then right again. However, while I'm obviously still a fan of this track changing its layout, I think the changes here aren't nearly as cool as going completely backwards. Oh, and this has got to be the lamest glider ramp of all time. Like, wow, you get to glide for 3.7 seconds on the last lap, big whoop. So in the end, this is still a fun track. I definitely don't hate racing on it, but I feel like it's just not as good as the others here. The problem here is that there are so many long stretches of pretty much nothing interesting happen, and even when something interesting does happen, well, it's kind of a stretch to call it interesting. Heck, on lap 3, there's absolutely zero shortcuts you can do since you don't go to the ramp section, which I think kind of goes against Mario Kart's infamous chaotic last laps that I find super interesting. If you're far behind going into lap 3 here, well, there's basically no hope of catching up unless your opponent's controllers explode. Oh yeah, and I can't say I'm that big of a fan of the music here either. Again, not bad, fits the setting, but it's not something I'm going to listen to outside of it. But that's enough about this track. Let's take a look at our next one, Shroom Ridge. This track has always been infamous for being, well, pretty forgettable. Some even go as far as to say it's Mario Kart DS's least memorable track. I mean, to be fair, when the other tracks in that game are some of the most popular in the series, it's understandable that some tracks may not live up to that standard. But hey, if it's anything, I went back to DS to get footage and I didn't even remember DS Mario Circuit existing at all, so at least Shroom Ridge isn't the least memorable. Now with all that said, I think we as a society have treated this track too harshly, because this might just be one of my favorite tracks here. The whole gimmick of this track is that it's another one that's on a road filled with cars. This has been done several times throughout the series. Heck, one of the most popular examples, Toad's Turnpike, is already featured in Mario Kart 8. Now I'm not sure if this is going to be a bold claim or not, but I personally find this to be much better than Toad's Turnpike ever was. For one, while the gimmick is somewhat the same, the setting is very different. Here we're driving with the cars directly next to a cliffside. Not only that, but there are also only 2 lanes instead of the 3 in Toad's Turnpike, making this feel much more scary. It's significantly more difficult to dodge all the cars on this track, and that's what makes this gimmick fun. I can say with almost full confidence that this is my favorite track of this first wave on 200cc. This track also got 2 new shortcuts that I think fit it pretty well. For one, there's a glider ramp in this patch of grass. Now I like that this does skip over the cars, but it doesn't go on for too long where the track becomes easy. I also feel like this track isn't really suitable for anti-gravity, so having a glider ramp ramp instead is a good modernization for it. The other shortcut though is a lot of fun to go for. Basically near the end of this track there's this random gust of wind off the cliffside, which you can actually jump into and reach the other side. Going for this is super scary because you're just completely over the void, but not only that, you have to make sure you don't hit any of the cars when landing back on the stage, which can be pretty hard. Both of those shortcuts add a lot to this track, and with Mario Kart 8 being a generally more chaotic game than DS with more items being thrown around, Shroom Ridge finally has a chance to be a pretty fun and well-known track. Really, more than anything, I think the mechanics of the game this track is tied to is what makes this version of it feel so much more fun to me. Oh, and the music? Absolute banger, probably my favorite track. The music track of the courses we talked about so far. But we do still have 2 more to cover, so let's dive into Sky Garden. Sky Garden was another one featured in DS, though it originated from Super Circuit. Much like the other GBA tracks, the aesthetic is what interested me the most about this course, and not necessarily the layout, but I think this remake kind of drops the ball on both of those ends for me. For one, the aesthetic doesn't really remind me much of the original. I'm not exactly sure why, but looking at the course doesn't really give me any Sky Garden vibes. To me, this course feels like the developers just saw the name and made a course based off of that instead of looking at the original level. That not only goes for the aesthetic, but the layout as well. I mean, if you compare the maps here, they don't look similar at all. Playing these 2 courses back to back, I don't really feel like this is a remake of Sky Garden. In addition, the layout changes here weren't for the better. The original had a lot of interesting shortcuts where you had to hop between different clouds to cut corners, whereas this version has fairly standard ones. There's a neat cut through these vines at the end, though I just find this to be a lamer version of the donut shortcut on Sweet Sweet Canyon. Not to mention that the leave shortcut at the start is probably one of the least satisfying shortcuts in the entire game. Just by looking at it, it seems like it could be pretty solid, though it'd be just a basic copy of the shortcut in Cloud Top Cruise. That's not much of a problem though, as that's a really fun one, and it's nice that it doesn't require a mushroom. But then you actually take this shortcut. The leaves are bouncy? Why? It makes it feel like you completely lose all of your speed because of that. I'm sure there's probably a way to take this shortcut with more grace, but to be honest, I kinda don't care. Now one last criticism, this is definitely the track that hurts the most from having no anti-gravity. I mean, with how the end of the track is pretty vertical, I would have thought they would have implemented it here, but no, instead it's just a normal strip of land. Now like every other track I've heavily criticized so far, this still isn't bad to race on, it's just that I don't find this one to be a good remake. In a game that already has a phenomenal cloud course, this one is just a letdown. On the bright side, the music is fairly solid, but Cloud Top Cruise beats it there as well. I mean, at least it's more distinct than Toad's Circuit, but that's all this track really has going for it in my opinion. But we do have one more track. Let's see if Ninja Hideaway can end us on a high note. It does. Like, that's all that I have to say, and if any of you have raced on it, you likely agree. This is the best course here. This is not only the best course of this wave, but it's also one of the best courses in the entire game. Paris Promenade got me to accept the tour tracks, Ninja Hideaway got me excited for them. But what makes this one so good? Well, for starters, I don't have any issue with how the track looks. Even with the weaker graphics of the DLC tracks, this one still looks pretty solid. The theming as well is incredibly unique. I love everything about this course visually. But of course, graphics are far from the only thing that matters. Let's look at the track design and oh boy, this delivers. The main gimmick about this track is that it has by far the most alternate routes out of any track, probably in the series. You first start on a roof where you then get to go inside and you are faced with an immediate decision. You can either go up the stairs or stay on ground level. If you stay on the ground, you have to avoid these spikes and possibly even get an item box. Going on top lets you skip over the spikes, but if you go up there though, you do miss this pretty well hidden shortcut through another set of piranha plant cutouts. If you went on the top route, depending on where the spike platform is, you can either go onto the glider ramp on the top or the bottom. The paths all converge at the glider section where you can immediately split off again, either going down into the building or into the roof. From there, when you ride along the roof, you can either stay on top or go onto the bottom, depending on which route you went for. Staying on top can be somewhat tricky, but the reward is quite high if you're playing in 200cc, because now you get to see what might be one of my top 5 shortcuts in the entire game. Normally, you would ride along the roof here in a long turn to get to the end. However, if you're playing at 200cc, you can actually jump off of the top part of this roof and land on the lower end of this roof. Not only are you cutting a massive chunk of the track, but it's really risky to go for, making this a perfect risk and reward balance. Heck, you can even do this if you don't have a mushroom, which is a massive plus. So that means even if you're in first place, you still have the choice to go for this based on if you think the players behind you will try for it as well. I know I said Shroom Ridge was my favorite 200cc course, and it probably still is, but this right here makes the competition quite close. This doesn't even seem like a jump that would be intentional, but the developer time trial actually takes this, which is how I found out about this in the first place. Oh, and we're still not even done with this course, as if you decide to stay on the roof, you can get access to a glider, and while that may seem pointless like the Tokyo Blur one from earlier, this one actually opens up another path you can take on laps 2 and 3, being inside the roof of the first building. Realistically, you could take a completely different route every single lap. Heck, every single time you play this course. I have a feeling that this is going to be a fan favorite for a long time, as it has by far the most replay value out of any track in this wave, and maybe even every track in this game. And to top all of that off, this is my favorite music track of this DLC. It's super hype inducing, especially on lap 2 when it really starts to kick in, and it made grinding for the time trial a lot more entertaining and intense. I think it's fairly safe to say I'm not alone in thinking this is the standout track of Wave 1. But anyways, level by level fans know what time it is. It's time for the tier list. Where do these tracks belong? Starting with Paris Promenade, it's got a really creative and memorable gimmick of going backwards on the final lap. The shortcuts are also decent here as well, it's just that driving on the first 2 laps is kinda basic. The gimmick does hard carry this though, so I do think it belongs at least on the high end of B tier. Toad Circuit, yeah, it's lame. It easily belongs in D tier, not F tier since again it's not bad to drive on, it's just really boring. This is definitely the weakest thing we've covered in the level by level series so far, but at least the music's good. Choco Mountain was the hardest one for me to rank. I pretty much don't have any problems with it, and it's a phenomenal remake of the original. This one definitely benefited the most from being remade. However, I just don't know if it's S tier worthy. It's a great track, but it's not one that I think stands out a ton compared to the other tracks in the base game. So for that, I'm going to give this a high A tier. Keep in mind that my opinions may change between episodes, so there's definitely a chance this could eventually squeeze its way into S tier. Coconut Mall is a fun track, but it was definitely not helped from being remade. A lot of great things from the original were cut or changed, and while this still is a good track, I don't think it'd be fair to put it very high, so it'll take the bottom end of B tier. Tokyo Blur has a decent gimmick, but it's overall somewhat boring to drive on. I think mid C tier suits it best. Shroom Ridge grows on me the more I play and see of it. Originally, I like Paris Promenade more, but upon re-examination, I think Shroom Ridge is definitely the better and more fun track. Yeah, its gimmick isn't as unique, but it does its gimmick perfectly, and that's the most important thing. For that reason, and for being a blast in 200cc, this is going to take high A tier, though I could see myself eventually moving it up. Sky Garden is another fairly lame one, nothing about it stands out, and it may even be inferior to its original version. It's going to take a high D tier for me. And for probably the easiest placement, Ninja Hideaway is an S tier, without question. It's at minimum the second best thing we've covered in this series so far, with only the Robo Brood giving it competition. My Odyssey bias does still make me put the Robo Brood on top overall, but it's a near tie. So here's our updated level by level tier list for episode 7. But anyways, that's it for this video. Are you all sad you can't get run over by your Freddy Fazbear me anymore? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot of fun writing this episode, maybe it's just because I'm super excited to finally be getting new tracks for this game, but either way, I do hope you all enjoyed it as well. Depending on how this video performs, I'll consider making another one of these for the rest of the DLC tracks, which I think will be kind of fun. Anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.